All right, guys. Chapter 11 is all about structure, organizational structure, and control of the firm. We're going to talk about kind of the nuts and bolts of a company, how it's situated, how it's set up that can facilitate strategy. What we'll talk about in a few minutes is how strategy and structure have a very reciprocal relationship. Each one influences the other. So let's get into it. So let's start out with a formal definition of organizational structure. What is organizational structure? Well, it is all of the formal reporting relationships, the lines of communication, so who you report to, who you talk to, and lines of authority, who tells who what to do, that are involved in the decision-making process. It tells people what their job is, who their boss is, and who they should be talking to. And it's really important to match organizational structure to the firm's strategy. Effective structure combines two kind of competing goals that have kind of come up in the past, but now we're talking about them in terms of structure. They provide stability and flexibility. Stability is related to the ability to efficiently do what we've always done and to kind of maintain our course. Flexibility is a bit of an opposite. It's the ability to change courses when the environment dictates that. Structural stability provides the capacity required to consistently and predictably manage daily work routines. So that's what stability is for. Structural flexibility provides for the opportunity to explore competitive possibilities. And it provides for the allocation of resources to activities that shape needed competitive advantages. So stability allows us to exploit what we're already doing. Flexibility allows us to explore new things and reallocate our resources into new areas. Strategy and structure have a reciprocal relationship. Structure flows from or follows the selection of the firm's strategy. In other words, you decide what kind of company you want to be, what strategy you want to pursue first, and then you need to design a structure to help you implement that strategy. However, once in place, structure can influence current strategic actions as well as choices about future strategies. In other words, you're very much constrained by the structure that you're in terms of your future strategic direction. You can't just haphazardly choose a new strategy and easily implement it because you've got a structure in place that's very much designed to implement your current strategy. And so that makes change difficult. But change is hard, right? Organizational inertia is going to slow down any structural changes. An example of this from history is the rivalry in the 20th century between Philips, NV Philips, which I talked about a couple of chapters ago, and Matsushita, which in 2008 became Panasonic. They were really rivals for the entertainment technology industry around the world in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. They were world leaders. There were others. There was RCA and Sony. But Philips and Matsushita were very much opposites, and they had opposite, very different structures related to that. Philips was the innovative company, the one that was constantly exploring new technologies, had a great marketing department, had their fingers on the pulse of what their customers wanted. Matsushita, on the other hand, was great at exploiting existing competencies. So Matsushita had a very stable structure that was able to, keep churning out the same products that they were doing in a very efficient, low-cost manner. Manufacturing had a lot of power in that company. Production had a lot of power. Whereas Philips, the marketers were in charge, and people with their fingers on the pulse of what customers wanted were really kind of driving the ship. They both kind of eyed each other and both had dreams of doing what the other was doing. And I showed you a couple of presentations ago how um, uh, Philips had a transnational structure, and they've kind of been able to evolve into a transnational company. But originally, they were very multi-domestic. They're based in the Netherlands, and which is a very small country, of course. And for that reason, if you're going to be a world-class company, you've got to cross borders. And so Philips did that, but they were a little bit, they coveted what Matsushita could do, the efficiencies, the ability to really, go hard and mass produce things at a low cost very efficiently. Matsushita, on the other hand, was frustrated that they were not as innovative as Philips. And so over the course of decades, multiple CEOs, both companies tried to develop what they saw as their shortcomings and basically copy their rival. And they were very much, aware of their rival and trying to do what their rival did. Both of them ultimately, I would say, failed. I mean, both companies still exist today, but they're not on top. Hundreds of millions of dollars were spent trying to pursue competitive advantages, core capabilities that they didn't currently have. And the reason, kind of the post-mortem on why it never did work for them, was structural inertia, right? Parts of the organization resisting the change. And not only that, it is hard to be ambidextrous. Ambidextrous in business means to do two things at the same time, to both explore and exploit. And some firms do succeed in being ambidextrous, but it's at great expense and great time and effort, and it takes a lot of managerial savvy to be able to pull that off. And so strategy and structure, again, have a reciprocal relationship. You can't just change your organization just because you want to. Firm structure evolves from simple to functional to multidivisional. This evolution is caused by cell growth and coordination and control problems that prevent the firm from efficiently implementing its strategy. So as implementation efforts falter when the firm grows, you fail to implement your strategy because things are so complex, right? You're a manager, you're boundedly rational, right? You can make rational decisions, but you don't have the ability to absorb and make perfect decisions with all of the information that you have. So bounded rationality is what prevents the firm from efficiently implementing things. So as those falter, the firm might need to change its structure to achieve a better fit between strategy and structure. All right. And so the first is a simple structure, and that's just an organizational form in which the owner-manager makes all the major decisions directly and monitors all activities, and the firm staff, tends to be one layer below the manager and just an extension of the manager's supervision authority. That works really well in small business, not so much as the business starts to grow. And then the functional structure is next. It consists of a CEO and a corporate staff with maybe some functional line managers in dominant functions. So production, accounting, R&D, HR, marketing, those type things. This structure allows for functional specialization, facilitating active knowledge sharing within each functional area. Knowledge sharing usually supports career paths and professional development of functional specialists. So that's what the functional structure looks like. However, sales growth can cause more coordination and control problems. Again, the CEO has bounded rationality and, they can make logical decisions based on what they know, but they can't know everything. And so when you have maybe the isolation of functional area managers, functional managers have problems that the CEO doesn't really understand, maybe increased diversification in terms of products or geographic regions, the structure has to change again. And the final form of the structure is the multi-divisional structure. And it's composed of operating divisions where each division represents a separate business to which the top corporate officer pushes down responsibility to those division managers. All right, so the multi-divisional structure is called the M form, and it's thought to have three major benefits. It allows corporate officers to accurately monitor business unit performance, and that simplifies those control problems, right? You're basically just each division is kind of in a silo and is evaluated on its own merits. Second, and related to that, it facilitates comparisons between the divisions, which can improve the resource allocation process, right? You want to put your chips on the divisions that are doing well, right? You want to bet on what's hitting. Whatever's doing well, you want to pump resources into those divisions. And finally, again related to that, the multi-divisional function stimulates managers of poorly performing divisions to look for ways to improve performance. If your company has 8 divisions, you don't want to be the 8th best performing division. You might worry about your job security. You might just want to say, hey, look, what's going on in these other divisions that maybe I can learn something from that and improve the performance in my division. Okay, this is a very important slide. It's important to note that different forms of the functional organizational structure can be mapped to, some of our generic strategies, primarily cost leadership, differentiation, and also the integrated strategy. So there are basically 3 characteristics that we want to look at here. So, like if you were looking at in chemistry, looking at an element, you would look at density and volume and mass and color and different things like that. Well, there are 3 characteristics of structure that we want to look at, and those are specialization, centralization, and formalization. We can kind of measure and characterize organizations by their levels of these 3 things. And also, I should note, these things kind of hang together. So it tends to be that high levels of specialization, centralization, and formalization, a lot of times you see that in the same company, and you see low levels in the same company, and there are strategic reasons for that, okay? So first off, let me just explain what these things are. Specialization is the number and types of jobs. It's the degree to which each individual job is highly specialized, right? And so basically, instead of having generalists that do a lot of different tasks and overlap with one another, that's a lack of specialization. In specialization, everybody knows their role, everybody stays in their lane and does their job, and that's a highly specialized structure. All right. Second, we have centralization, and that is the degree to which the authority in the company is vested in only a few people. All right, so the higher the level of centralization, maximum centralization would be one person making every single micromanaged decision that the company does. Low levels of centralization disperse the decision-making authority across the organization. They push things down to lower level managers and employees. And so a decentralized firm doesn't, the power to make decisions is spread across a lot of people. All right. The third one is formalization, and formalization refers to basically how many written rules and work procedures, how structured things are. So is there a manual that tells you exactly every single thing to do in your job, including exactly how to greet customers, exactly how to respond to every single customer question if you're in sales? Is it very structured? Is every part of your day kind of guided by formal rules and work procedures? Or a lack of formalization says, no, we're going to give you a lot of freedom to improvise, right? To respond to challenges on your own, to make your own calls. And so the degree of formalization just refers to, how detailed the rules are. Think about things like standard operating procedures. Companies that are highly formalized have a lot of standard operating procedures. Okay, so here's the deal. When there are high levels of these things, maybe you can pause the video and predict, but high levels of these things go to certain strategies, and low levels of these things go to certain strategies. And so I'm thinking primarily of cost leadership versus differentiation. So which do you think? If you think that high levels of these three things, specialization, centralization, and formalization, map to cost leadership, then you're correct. When these things are in place, it makes for an organization that is kind of less organic, that's more machine-like. Everybody does their own thing. We know what we should do because centralized decision makers make the decisions. Our jobs and tasks are very well defined by a rule book, and we know exactly what we're supposed to do each day. There's not a lot of improv going on. We specialize in only a few jobs, etc. That is good for being efficient. That's good for an organization that wants to exploit existing competencies. On the other hand, when there are low levels in organizations, there is more freedom, there's more uncertainty, there's more improvisation, there may be more creativity, but there's also less efficiency. So when there's lower levels, that's actually good. That's conducive for a differentiation strategy. One of the things about a differentiation strategy is that it requires more communication, collaboration, working together, sharing of knowledge, because you're trying to do new things and trying to figure out what works for everybody and trying to figure out what's possible. And it's hard for one person to be innovative, but an organization can collectively come together and be innovative in meaningful ways. And so, under low levels of these things that invite that collaboration, invite that knowledge sharing, that's how you create an environment that's good for differentiation. And then the last one, integrated cost leadership, well, it's in the middle, right? And so we might have high levels of some and low levels of others. They might all kind of be moderate, which is kind of what you would expect with an integrated cost leadership strategy. But definitely there's variation on these three dimensions in a predictable manner, depending on which type of strategy a company selects. Okay, so some notes about a cost leadership structure. First of all, note that you've got a centralized staff. This centralized staff there's centralized authority to make decisions, and the centralized staff do that. And then there are kind of like direct lines of communication between each of the functions and the centralized staff. Operations here in the middle is the main function. That's not really easy to see from the diagram, but it does tend to be the dominant function. And people that rise up to like the president, although you're going to have like the VP of each of these in the centralized staff, but the office of the president a lot of times is going to come from operations, from that centralized, from that primary function. Process engineering is emphasized rather than new product R&D. There tends to be formalized procedures that allow for the emergence of a low-cost culture, so things are very formalized. And again, overall, the structure is very mechanistic. All right, so I want you to look at this one and then note the difference between this one and the structure for a differentiation strategy. Okay, for a differentiation structure, note a couple things. You don't have those dashed lines from the different functions to a centralized staff. You also don't have a centralized staff. There's this president and limited staff, and then two departments, R&D and marketing, have a lot of control. R&D figures out what's possible to do in terms of new product development. Marketing tells R&D what customers want, and they work together, but there's a looseness here, right? There's not this tight-knit centralized staff, and at lower levels of the company, there's not as much direct oversight between these two functions and the lower levels of the company. So marketing tends to be the dominant function, followed closely by R&D. Most of these functions are decentralized and kind of operate more loosely, more on their own than they do in a low-cost structure. Formalization tends to be limited so that new products can organically emerge and be more, that just creativity occurs better. And basically overall, the job roles are less structured and it's more organic. Okay, so you've come to the end of part 1 of chapter 11. We've looked at that there was a slide at the beginning, and we looked at that slide, and we're actually not down to the bottom yet. These are basically the functional structures. In the next presentation, I'm going to talk about the types of multidivisional structures and how they differ.